Hi there. Welcome back to Prices at the Pumps on SaltWire, our weekly look at all things energy related. Scott Squires with the energy expert Dan McTeague. Dan, I've got my list of things I want to talk to you about, but first things first, prices adjusted in the Atlantic region tomorrow and Friday. What are consumers going to find when they go to the pumps to fill up their car, truck, whatever?
Christmas came a little early again. Prices for everything are dropping. Energy prices especially. OPEC didn't do what it was supposed to do last week, and that's give assurance that it could actually cut production. It said it does, but it's voluntary. And there's a lot of people that are very skeptical about those kind of voluntary compliance. The good news is that for us here in Atlantic Canada, beginning tomorrow in Newfoundland, look for about a 3-cent decrease for gasoline. And if you can hold off till tomorrow, at least in Newfoundland, more like a 6, maybe even a 6.5 cent a liter decrease for diesel and home heating fuel. Propane should be down about 2 to 3 cents. All this is heading in the right direction, and the reasons behind it may not be comforting if you're an energy trader, but if you're a consumer, it is definitely good news compared to what we were paying this time last year. For diesel, for instance, you were paying almost 46 cents a liter more per liter, and of course, gasoline down about 11 cents compared to what we were paying the first and second weeks of December. So all good news for consumers, and we may actually continue to see a bit of a decline so that provinces, Atlantic provinces such as PEI, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick could see perhaps even a 3.3 cent decrease for gasoline and maybe a 6.9 or 6.8 cent a liter decrease for diesel. Bottom line, wait till Thursday and Friday. Whenever the utility boards make the decision to change, they will inevitably have to reflect what everyone else has been seeing right across North America. And it's a pretty steep decline in prices.
Dan, a big thing you talk about are the fundamentals of the markets. Looking at what you know, and I know that you're looking at the numbers in the markets day in and day out, what do you feel is causing these prices to go down when conventional wisdom would say that perhaps they should be going up? Why are they going down?
Well, we're not getting the cold winter that we sometimes get in December. It looks like winter may take a bit of a break for a week or so, at least in North America. We had a bit of cold weather and a little bit of, inclement weather, but nothing really to write home about. It hasn't, in some way reduced the inventory of diesel. Gasoline is extremely balanced. There's plenty of supply of it. There's some indication that there isn't the great spectacular increase in gasoline demand that you might have expected, the U.S. having gone through Thanksgiving last week. And of course, the bigger issue is that markets do not believe Saudi Arabia and Russia and 22 other members of OPEC Plus, who said that they're going to cut an additional 500 million barrels by the first quarter of 2024. They're seeing that as being questionable. And they're also looking at U.S. numbers. The U.S. production continues to be extraordinarily strong, 13.2 million barrels. And what that really means is that the world appears, at least from on the surface, to be well supplied. Of course, there's always the nervous Nellies worried about the recession, what the U.S. Federal Reserve will do with interest rates. We're seeing that here in Canada, where there's been apparently just a bit of a pause. Maybe inflation is not on decline. Whatever the case may be, slowdown in China, concerns about the housing crunch there and the lack of credit, no stimulus. Take your pick. There's a lot of reasons to be negative, very few reasons to be positive. The good news for all of us is that means lower prices for fuel.
And as consumers, we'll take wins where we can get them, Dan. Something else as well, breaking news just earlier today, the Bank of Canada announcing that they're going to hold the interest rates steady at 5%. What's your take on that? What do you make of it?
Well, I think the Bank of Canada looked at fuel prices last month compared to the year before and saw that was a pretty significant decrease with interest rates with inflation down to 2.9%, headline 3.1%. It really means that maybe they're taking a wait and see approach. The economy is declining. There's economic activity is slowing, not in the United States, but in Canada. So I think for the Bank of Canada, which may have raised this very dramatically and rapidly, that is interest rates, they may very well want to hit the pause button. What I was expecting is an indication as to when they'll start to bring interest rates down. I don't see that happening. I think the Bank of Canada is going to be more focused on federal and provincial governments having built their balance sheets, the sense that a lot more debt now than we've ever seen before. Canada has a $1.2 trillion debt. its deficits are likely to increase. That could continue to add upward pressure on interest rates, even when the economy slows down and inflation is no longer there. The fact the federal government and other jurisdictions, provincial governments in particular, are borrowing like there's no tomorrow may very well continue to add pressure to interest rates. So it's a lot to unparcel there, but no doubt we find ourselves wanting those interest rates to come down, but we may not be able to, given that federal government and other governments have increased their debt loads dramatically, significantly. And as I said, I would hope that the bond rating agencies don't, question our credit worthiness. If that happens, then those interest rates will have to go higher.
Then last week we talked about the big climate conference that was going to be starting up in Dubai. Tens of thousands of people expected to attend. For you, over the last couple of days, what's jumped out at you? Has there been a couple of headlines coming out of this climate conference, COP28 in Dubai, that's made Dan McTeague go, what?
Yeah. Well, I knew we were going to be in a bit of trouble when the chair or the host, Sultan Al-Jaber, made the comment that climate is not based on real science, and that the proposal to kill fossil fuels will have most of us living in caves. It's not very far from what I said about, living the state of nature and eating acorns, which is where we might wind up if we go about this too quickly. I think that was a bit of a shock, a body blow to a conference that is by far and away the best attended. And I think it's well attended now because I think those who have a countervailing interest, we call it reality, from the energy sector, propane, natural gas, those who are working hard on the sequestration, carbon, capture and underground storage, CCUS, are also there and saying enough of this. And there's also the other headline, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure it was Reuters that ran it, but saying that there's no way we can prevent 1.5 degree increase, and we just have to get used to it and adapt to it. So all of this, concern about, temperatures rising globally now seem to be in the rearview mirror. It's already happened. And therefore, how do we mitigate? How do we handle it? And, setting aside that there are significant, profound differences as to why it's happening, given the complexity of atmospheric climate science. You can't call it climate science because that doesn't exist. It's not a discipline. There's a number of disciplines layered within that. And I think it's important for people to understand that. Someone says they're climate scientists, check it out, because it takes 15 different types of science involved, and you can't be an expert in every single one. So that aside, I thought that was a very interesting admission. It's going to be another week and a half of a lot of talk, and potentially, from my perspective, one of the most dangerous things is against Stephen Guilbeault is out to do more damage to the Canadian economy by forcing these regulations on methane capture. We've already done a lot of this, and we're doing a damn good job at it, but he wants it done by 2030, like his electric regulations, like his clean fuel standard, like his just transition. These guys are snapping these things out faster than most can really connect the dots and realize that the effects of which are measured against significant pushback in reality. Same group that pushed carbon taxes, not just the first one, but the second one over the past couple of years, and now finding that reality is starting to hit them hard politically. And there's a reason why the federal Liberals and NDP and other parties in that similar vein are losing significant ground, because while we all want to do right by the environment, we also have to be able to eat and feed ourselves and make ends meet. You go too fast at this thing, you don't look before you leap, you wind up doing some pretty bad policy. And to simply double down, as Stephen Guilbeault and Justin Trudeau are doing, well-meaning as it is damaging to the Canadian economy, to Canadians in general. And I think it speaks volumes as to why their support is as weak as it is right across the country.
Well, and just to kind of expand on that, Dan, you and I touched on this last week, but we're seeing now provincial governments and provincial premiers push back vigorously against some of these federal mandates and these federal regulations. Probably the most vocal right now and leading the way would be Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, but we're seeing it in other provinces as well. What do you make of this as someone who spent 18 years as an MP in the Liberal government? What do you make of this when you see provinces basically looking at the federal government and saying, nope, not going to listen. You're stepping into provincial territory where you shouldn't have oversight. What do you make of it?
I think climate policies in general do not take into account, our federation. And I've talked about reality in terms of their effect on everyone's bottom line with no appreciable outcome. You talk about having a billion of these, regulations and taxes, but if you're not going to drop the so-called emission, and we're talking only one, CO2, carbon dioxide, forget all the other pollutants that we've actually addressed. But if you're going to focus on that one, you have to make sure it's done in the context of the country. And many of these things, we've seen now 2 court decisions, one from the Supreme Court, one from the federal court. The former being, of course, on the issue of the Impact Analysis Act, the so-called Bill C-69, the anti-pipeline bill, no more pipelines bill that the Trudeau and NDP government pushed through, ruled unconstitutional, as it does, in fact, trample on provincial jurisdiction, especially within the provinces. You have pipelines within your own jurisdiction. You can, as long as it doesn't cross into another province, intra-provincial, or another state, then the federal government doesn't have much authority or oversight, nor should it. But it didn't bother checking the Constitution when it decided to implement that act. The second one, of course, the plastics ban, which the government said was based on our evidence of the plastics were toxic. When the court asked the federal government, where's your evidence? There was no evidence. This is very similar, by the way, to the work that we did on the Clean Fuel Standard here at Canadians for Affordable Energy. When we saw that the federal government was going to ramrod the first version of those regulations back in 2019, 2020, we had our friend and economist, Ross McKittrick from LFX and Associates, work with us to determine that the federal government never did a cost-benefit analysis. Had it done so, it would have realized for every benefit, environmental and otherwise, there was a 6-fold cost to consumers. In other words, whoever is deciding these things is doing so to be trendy and be cool and to look like they're tough and decent and okay by the climate tiers. But Canada's a very complex country, and when you have even provinces like Quebec and BC saying we'll stand up with Alberta and with Saskatchewan when it comes to defending provincial rights, the federal government's got to take a very different turn on this and win these things over by consensus. Consensus means reality. Consensus means listening to everybody and incorporating that in whatever decision you make. Consensus is realizing this is a very diverse country, not easy to manage. The last thing you do is to try to run and provide legislation that's cool and trendy, but runs roughshod over the principles of the division of powers in this country that have been around since 1867, Section 91 and 92. This is what the provinces do. This is what the federal government does. If you don't respect those, then you can be darn sure they're going to be challenged and struck down by courts, as long as those courts themselves are not unduly biased.
And something I want to mention as well, we put it out there a week or two ago. One of our listeners had tagged us in a post on X saying, hey, it'd be great if maybe the food professor, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, could join in an episode of Prices at the Pumps. Well, I reached out to the good doctor and he's agreed. He's going to come on and join us, be a part of the conversation for some of the show in a couple of weeks. Maybe just a little bit of a tease, Dan, but what are a couple of things or maybe one particular thing that you'd like to kind of open up a discussion with Dr. Charlebois about when it comes to food cost and how carbon taxes and taxes on fuel can affect things down the line, trickle down effect, right? The producers, the manufacturers, the truckers, et cetera.
The food professor speaks for all of us and has really become, our resident expert in trying to pinpoint for us why the cost of food is so high. And I, of course, have my own bias, believe it has a lot to do with energy prices, but it's not just, governments and global prices by energy markets and how they perceive supply and demand and otherwise. There are some fundamental things that we've done in this country, which I think the food professor, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie University, will be able to explain the effect of carbon taxes, perhaps net zero policies, on the totality of why energy, or rather food prices, are as high as they are. And my take would be a little bit more interesting in the sense that when you look at the other side of this, not getting enough energy to the global markets and not getting enough people to buy Canadian dollars means food like oil is, and natural gas and propane is a globally traded product, usually traded in U.S. dollars. The Canadian dollar is trading 137 pennies to buy a U.S. dollar. You can see how that really does also have an impact on the cost of everything, most notably food.
Well, certainly look forward to that conversation, and stay tuned. We'll be announcing when Dr. Charlebois will be joining Dan and I. I believe right now, tentatively, it's going to be on Wednesday, December 20th, but again, stay tuned. And Dan, before we wrap up here, it is getting close to that holiday season. And for those of us that put our trees up, some earlier than others, right here, we've been talking about showing our Christmas trees. So before we wrap up today, here we go. You showed it before we started recording earlier, but we're going to put a picture of your tree up right now. So let's have a look at it.
Well,
there it is, Dan. It looks lovely. So now, you were mentioning before, you still have a little bit of work to do there. You still have some decorations and some things to put on.
Yeah, you'll see just a few of those little Christmas balls are there. I have another 40 to put on there. I was supposed to get some help, but the help didn't show up. Apparently, I'm going to have a little wee toddy and do it myself at about 3 o'clock in the morning at some point. But it should be ready this week, I promise. But this is probably as good as it gets for at least for today.
Well, as we look at my tree, I give the majority of the credit to my youngest daughter, who just turned 18 recently. She does the bulk of the decorating and the bulb hanging. So I kind of just take the pieces. We moved to an artificial a few years ago, and I just take the pieces and kind of snap them together and click it on. She does the rest. So there we go. We're that much closer to completed holiday preparations, Dan.
I'm looking forward to that. And my Christmas tree eventually will get done, probably about the 24th of December, at which point it'll be a week before. It'll probably take about 2 months before I take it down. A little bit like the Christmas lights outside.
Well, see, that's why artificial is so good. Needles don't fall off. I don't have to water it, and I can leave it up as long as I want.
Well, the good thing about Christmas lights, like anything else, you can leave them up all year. They eventually just change colors. But, why go through the effort? And they look great any time of the year.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Dan, thanks for your time. Enjoy the rest of your week, and look forward to chatting with you again next week on Prices at the Pumps.
Always a pleasure to be here at Prices at the Pumps here in SaltWire. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you, Dan. Bye-bye.